You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. This weekend, on Sunday, in fact, the FIFA Club World Cup descends on Seattle. Now, this is not the big tournament that pits national teams against each other. That's coming in 2026. Instead, this tournament features club teams from around the world. Spectators in Seattle will be able to see storied squads like Atletico Madrid and Paris Saint-Germain, or PSG, taking the pitch throughout June. For clubs, there is big money at stake, but the majority of that money, at least when it comes to Major League Soccer, is set to go to the club's ownership. U.S. players, including ones with the Seattle Sounders, won't see much of it. So players have been speaking out about what they call a, quote, cash grab. U.S. fans of the beautiful game are now following an ugly contract dispute, and here to explain it all is Pablo Mauer, a writer at The Athletic who covers soccer. Pablo, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to just start with some basics because I'm not super familiar with the Club World Cup. What is the deal here? Have they been doing this for a long time? Is it different from the World Cup, and how? What's the deal?
Yeah, it's certainly different from the World Cup. The World Cup, as you mentioned there in the intro, pits, national teams against each other. The Club World Cup, which has existed in some form or another for a couple of decades, in addition to the national teams, obviously you have just club teams, like the Seattle Sounders would be a club team. The Club World Cup pits what would arguably be the best club teams around the world against each other in a tournament. So, I mean, it is certainly very much like the World Cup that, you'd normally think of, but instead of national teams, it's just club teams.
I don't mean to be disparaging of U.S. clubs, but are we really in the top 32 clubs worldwide, like several MLS teams? How do they qualify for the tournament?
Yeah, so soccer generally is divided into regions, right? There's UEFA, which is the European region. There's CAF, for example, which would be the African Federation. The US is part of what's called CONCACAF, which is North America, Central America, and the Caribbean. So, there are teams that qualify from every region. I mean, no, obviously the Seattle Sounders, even Inter Miami with all their stars, are not,
Even
a
with
top
Messi,
30
yeah.
club. Yeah, they're not a top 30 club globally by any means, but neither are teams, from Morocco or Saudi Arabia or, any of these other smaller teams from leagues that qualified for the tournament.
So FIFA is going to be handing out about $1 billion to participating clubs over the course of the tournament. How is that money distributed, and what is the sticking point for these players?
Yeah, so generous of FIFA. The benefactor of this whole thing. Yeah, I mean, the prize pool, as you mentioned, is about $1 billion, which is, absolutely insane for a club tournament. Teams get, X amount of dollars just for qualifying. To give you an example of, where MLS's place is in this tournament, for example, each of those teams, they get, I want to say it's $7 or $8 million just for making the tournament. You compare that to like Real Madrid or, one of these other larger clubs, PSG, who you mentioned, they get, 3 to 4 times that just for qualifying. That's literally just because of their commercial footprint and their sort of, level of relevance they have in the global game. As teams win games and advance in the tournament, it starts out much like the World Cup with what's called a group stage. So 4 teams are grouped together. They all play each other once, and then the top 2 teams advance to the elimination round. As teams advance, I mean, Seattle realistically isn't the hardest group in the tournament, so I have a feeling they're just going to get, shredded. But if they pulled off a miracle in advance, that would be, another several $1 million. And each round they advance, it's, millions of dollars more. As you mentioned in the Open, the issue at play here is that, when teams participate in these tournaments, typically players obviously receive a share of the winnings, like a bonus. Players on clubs from other teams across the globe are getting like a much larger share of the bonus pool, than MLS players are. We can talk a little bit about that. It's just because of some language in their bargaining agreement with the league.
Yeah, what does that look like? How are the MLS players treated compared with worldwide?
Yeah, so MLS is a union shop. They, once every 7 years, the MLSPA, which is the Players Association, they, enter into like an almost always very contentious negotiating process with the league. It comes down to the last minute, and then they sign a deal and you get X concessions, whatever. There's language in that bargaining agreement that stipulates what the player's share of a payout for a tournament like this is. The issue is that, there are tournaments that a team like the Seattle Sounders will participate in almost every year. There's the US Open Cup, which is, an old tournament that pits essentially major and minor league teams against each other. There is CONCACAF Champions Cup, which is, the club championship of our region. That is actually how you qualify for the Club World Cup. And then there are other little odds and ends. There's language in the CBA that says, if a tournament isn't listed specifically here, the payout isn't going to be more than $1 million, right?
Hmm.
That's a lot of money. The issue is that the Club World Cup with this $1 billion prize pool didn't even exist, obviously, when the CBA was drafted. So players are saying, hey, I know that the PA signed this thing, but obviously the reality has changed so drastically here that, it would just be a good faith thing to renegotiate.
Yeah. I'm just stuck on that $1 billion pot of money.
Yeah.
Like, why is FIFA willing to dole out so much for this Club World Cup?
I mean, because they're going to make way more than $1 billion. I mean, you mentioned the World Cup is in the United States, Canada, and Mexico next year. I mean, many people do understand. You may understand as well. When FIFA comes to town, it very much is like the Olympic Games where they get, huge tax concessions from local municipalities. And I mean, they are just a
And that's
money-making
not to say
machine.
the amount that might have been doled out behind the scenes beforehand to get the actual tournament cited there. I mean, famously known for a really transparent and fair process with no kickbacks. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I hear all that stuff's fixed now. So yeah, I mean, it is an insane amount of money, obviously. I mean, I do think, as an aside, FIFA may have sort of overestimated the appeal of a tournament like this in the United States. I mean, something that sticks out to me is, you have, teams here in DC, there are games, and, you have games between, a team from Saudi Arabia and a team from Morocco or something like that, or you have, Red Bull Salzburg playing again, a team from CAF, and there just aren't sizable fan bases of these clubs in DC, despite our multicultural nature. And the games are also being played for a European television audience, which means that some of these games start at like 3 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. And
Mm.
like, I don't know anybody in the District of Columbia that's going to go sit outside in June or July at 3 p.m. on a weekday and deal with traffic and all this other stuff. So,
Yeah, our weather is a
FIFA
little
very
bit
much,
better here in July and in
yeah,
the summer.
yeah.
So Seattle fans might feel slightly differently, but in terms of, doling out money for their own tickets and seeing teams that they might not have a big stake in, that is kind of an interesting move from FIFA to decide to kind of make that play for the American audience. Pablo, MLS players, that's, of course, the league that we're talking about, although we're going to be seeing clubs from all over the world. They've been having some protest activity. They've been speaking out about how the payouts are distributed for the FIFA Club World Cup. 2 weekends ago, Sounders players wore shirts during their warm-up with the Monopoly guy on them, and it said FIFA World Cash Grab on the T-shirt. Specifically, are you seeing any kind of movement or reaction from ownership or FIFA to some of the ways that the players have been trying to agitate for better pay?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think FIFA cares at all. MLS, they've been engaged in conversations kind of informally for a couple months with the players union trying to work something out. Much as they do with the CBA every 7 years, they very much left it last minute. I think obviously gives them a tremendous amount of leverage. I don't think there's any real situation. I don't think there's any real, scenario here where the players strike. So I think MLS sort of knows that it's basically up to them. I mean, my opinion here is like it's a really easy win for MLS to just offer some realistic concessions. I mean, reports came out yesterday that they did come to the table. I offered a little bit more, I think, bonus money, but as people do in labor negotiations, they offered a little bit more in bonus money, and then there were like two or three completely unrelated concessions that the players were going to have to make. To me, I mean, like MLS is flush with cash, so is FIFA. People pay to see the players. They're the workers here. I think like I said, I think it's probably an easy win for MLS just to come to the table and give them something fair.
A local publication that covers the Sounders closely, Sounder at Heart, reported that Sounders majority owner Adrian Hanauer upbraided the team in a profanity-laced post-game address after that move where they wore the Monopoly Man shirts before a game. So ownership not necessarily taking this the best way. But do you think there could be a new deal at all here for these players hammered out before the tournament starts? I mean, it's Sunday, right?
I would have loved to be a fly on the wall there. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a chance. It's tough to say, right? Because the union right now is sort of talking a big game about all this. I mean, they haven't ruled out striking or something like that. But then again, that's sort of what they always do in these CBA negotiations. And if you ask a lot of players around the league, some of them don't have a ton of faith in their players' union. There's a lot of heartburn around the last CBA. Players feel like they should have the minimum salary, should have gotten better travel conditions, that sort of stuff. It would seem, impossible that they don't get something. I don't think it's going to be what the players want. I mean, there's not a reality where their share of the bonus for this tournament equals, what, a Real Madrid player is going to get. And I don't even know if they're asking for that, obviously. I just think they want something more than peanuts. So we'll see what happens,
Yeah, even if they get a greater share than what they're currently offered, it won't compare, as you say, to the compensation that these bigger club teams around the world are getting for participating. So it wouldn't be like the same as like a marquee name from Europe is getting, just a little bigger piece of the pie. Fan sentiment does seem to be on the side of the players, at least in Seattle. I mean, after this move with the T-shirts, the fans were chanting in support during the game. That might have been part of why the ownership had such a strong reaction. Is there any chance that puts any more pressure on FIFA or these owners, or have we seen any fan pressure ever make a move, in terms of pay fairness in soccer in the past?
It's tough to say, right? Because I always joke I mean, I've been covering MLS for 12 or 13 years and, go back and forth with fans on, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, Blue Sky. And, this is not uncommon. I mean, fans have, for example, threatened to boycott teams for any number of reasons. I mean, from just being bad at soccer to, supporting the wrong political causes to, censoring free speech in stadiums, that sort of stuff. And it never seems to happen. And, I always, my thing to fans is, really the only thing that is going to work is to take money out of an owner's pocket. So they should just not show up. But, ownership knows that, in America and globally too, people have this incredible attachment to their favorite sports teams. I mean, to many people, it's like the center of their social life. They have like memories sort of tied up in all this stuff. And I think they're kind of take advantage of that sometimes. It's not as easy as you might think for a fan just to be like, oh, well, players didn't get the bonuses. I'm just not going to go watch,
Yeah, this team
so
that I've been watching with my dad for decades or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now I'm watching with my kid or, whatever it is. I mean,
Yeah.
the Sounders, obviously, in some form or another, have been in Seattle for literal decades,
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a really, really interesting situation. We'll just have to see, how far MLS is willing to come to the other side, if at all.
Pablo Mauer is a staff writer at The Athletic covering soccer. Really appreciate your time today, Pablo. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. And hey, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.